Was Neil Peart overrated? Let's talk about it. So probably no drummer in the history of rock has had more accolade heaped upon them, with the exception of maybe Ringo Starr or Charlie Watts, than Neil Peart. He's considered to be the greatest technician and one of the most popular drummers, and he consistently comes out at the top of polls, and did and has since the 1980s. So his stature and reputation is at the very, very top of rock drummers, and for this reason it seems logical to ask the question, does he deserve this reputation? And one of the things I want to point out right off the top from this is that in this video we're not talking about his lyrics at all. The purpose of this video is simply to talk about his drumming. So when you want to analyze Neil Peart as a drummer, I think there's three elements that you have to talk about, and so number one is power. Neil Peart patterned himself after Keith Moon and John Bonham, and he plays with a tremendous amount of aggression and power, and it's particularly true in his snare work and in his footwork. He is an incredible with his double bass, and he uses the double bass in a slightly different way than most drummers do, which is to emphasize the end of his drum fills and to do build-ups and takedowns rather than to keep a double bass drum based beat. The second element of Neil Peart that I think you have to talk about is his precision. He's one of the most precise drummers that ever lived, and his precision is based around doing technical things that most people would find too challenging to even attempt, but then doing them with like no hands, no hands. So he wants to master every little element of drumming, not just be good at one thing, but be good at all of them, and then put them all together. And his precision is something that is built into the drum kit itself, the way that he ergonomically designs it so that it was easy for him to reach whatever he needed to get to, the way that he set up his drum kit differently depending on what type of songs Rush was doing for that particular album and tour, or depending on where his feelings of his body and his imagination were, he would change the kit around. And he had a really diverse and large drum kit that he didn't just use as a stage prop, but he made full use of the entire thing. Which leads me to the third and perhaps most crucial point with Neil Peart's drumming, which is imagination. He might be one of the most imaginative drummers that ever played. Except I would put Ringo Starr in there, and I would almost put Charlie Watts in there, but they don't play loudly enough that most people appreciate their imagination. But if you listen carefully, particularly with Ringo Starr, he definitely orchestrated his drum parts in a similar fashion to the way that Neil Peart orchestrated his drum parts, but not with the same technical complexity. So I think that Neil Peart has power, precision, imagination, and he continued to grow and develop as a drummer. He's very famous for having reinvented his drumming late in life and going back and starting essentially at square one. I think that being in a trio puts a super heavy burden on a drummer, because first you're walking a tightrope of whether or not you're going to fill up space so that the band doesn't sound empty, or whether you're going to overplay and step on someone's toes because it's only a trio. So you're walking a tightrope to begin with, and Peart innately had a lot of energy, a lot of adrenaline, a lot of imagination, and he wanted to play a lot. So for all these reasons, I would say, how could you possibly call the man overrated? He is one of the greatest technicians. He is one of the greatest theoreticians, and he has got one of the best imaginations of any player in rock. But here's where it gets a little bit tricky, because Peart's reputation is consistently that he is the best drummer in rock, or he's one of the top 3 drummers in rock. It's either him or Bonham usually. And for this reason, I think you can say that an argument can be made that he's overrated, because his playing is not definitive rock playing. It leans closer to fusion playing and jazz playing. So a drummer who hasn't got the same obvious technical chops as Peart, somebody like Phil Rudd, for example, he would be a drummer who was just as important in terms of his contribution to his band and just as imaginative within his own limited scope. You could take drummers from really fast thrash bands and show that speed and precision isn't just something that Neil Peart has. And then, of course, with the imagination issue, I think Ringo Starr is a real good candidate for someone who had a similarly inventive flair. And then there are drummers like Jeff Porcaro who are just better timekeepers. Peart, for all of his accomplishments, doesn't have like a signature beat, or he doesn't have a Rosanna halftime shuffle, so to speak, or he doesn't have a hookiness to his playing that's the same. Drummers of far less technical ability have more crowd-pleasing approach. But my final verdict on this is that no, Neil Peart is not overrated, even though he does lack in certain, as I say, commercial or crowd-pleasing elements. Now, not to Rush fans, of course, but to just the general listener. I don't think that these limitations are such that it in any way weighs his reputation down. I think that his dedication to drumming is probably a lot more profound and intense and long-lasting than just about anybody else in the business, and I think that paid off in dividends. So those are my thoughts, and I'd like to hear what you think, so feel free to comment in the section below. Remember to like and subscribe. Thanks a lot.